history lied to us about one of the most mysterious communities in America. For 300 years, scholars couldn't explain their language, their food, or their rituals. They thought it was just an accident of geography. But a recent DNA discovery just exposed a dark, 300-year-old secret that rewrites everything we know about American history. Off the coast of South Carolina, Georgia, and northern Florida lies a narrow strip of land known as the Sea Islands. This is the home of the Gullah Geechee people. For hundreds of years, there has been a brutal rule of history. When you are thrown into the most ruthless slave machine in the world, your identity is erased. Families are torn apart. True names are stripped away. Languages are forbidden. After 1 or 2 generations, most Africans brought to North America were left with only shattered fragments of their culture. But the Gullah Geechee completely shattered that rule. For 3 centuries, they have spoken a strange Creole language that once left linguists scratching their heads. It sounds faintly like English, but its grammatical structure is identical to that of the Mende or Yoruba people in West Africa. They eat West African foods. They practice spirituality exactly as their ancestors did centuries ago. How could this happen? For over a century, history books offered a very logical explanation: isolation. History claimed that because they lived on remote, marshy islands disconnected from the mainland, their culture was luckily preserved. It is a beautiful story, but the truth is, history was wrong. Or more accurately, history missed a shocking truth. And it wasn't until geneticists stepped in with modern DNA sequencing technology that a secret buried for 3 centuries was brought to light. The Gullah Geechee didn't preserve their culture out of luck or isolation. They preserved it for a much darker and more ironic reason. Before we talk about DNA, let's look at the isolation hypothesis that historians once believed. In the 18th century, the Sea Islands were a nightmare for white people. The climate was damp, the swamps smelled stifling, and crucially, mosquitoes carrying malaria and yellow fever thrived there. White plantation owners were terrified of this land. They rarely lived on the plantations, preferring to escape to the city of Charleston to enjoy the fresh air, leaving the management of the plantations to black drivers. Because there was no strict supervision from white overseers, it was believed that the enslaved people here had room to breathe, to freely speak their language, and to preserve their culture. But this logic has a massive flaw. Isolation can only explain preservation, but it cannot explain uniformity. Imagine this: the transatlantic slave trade was a process of intentional mixing. Human traffickers deliberately captured people from dozens of different tribes, speaking dozens of different languages, threw them onto the same ships, and separated them at the plantations to prevent rebellions. If they were simply isolated on an island, their culture should have been a meaningless melting pot. But the culture of the Gullah Geechee is not like that. It is highly specific. It is not a generic Africa. Researchers discovered that their basket-weaving techniques are identical to those in Senegal. Their sentence structures perfectly match languages in Sierra Leone. How could a randomly kidnapped population possess such a high degree of uniformity? The answer lies in a plant and a ruthless economic ambition. In the early 1700s, South Carolina had nothing but useless swamps. But British colonial planters discovered a type of blue gold. It was wetland rice, specifically a variety known as Carolina gold. But there was a fatal problem. Europeans did not know how to grow wetland rice. British agriculture consisted of wheat and barley on dry land. They were completely clueless about cultivating tidal wetlands. They didn't know how to build dikes, dig canals, or manage the complex irrigation cycles of the coastal region. So what did they do? They didn't just buy random manual laborers. They went hunting for experts. They turned their eyes to the rice coast of West Africa, a strip of land stretching from modern-day Senegal down to Sierra Leone and Liberia. This was where the West African wetland rice civilization had flourished for thousands of years. Surviving historical trade documents reveal a chilling truth. Plantation owners in South Carolina explicitly instructed slave traders that they wanted to buy people from specific regions, particularly the Mendi, Yoruba, or Congo people. They were willing to pay higher prices for people from the Rice Coast. They did not view these people as human beings, but as living manuals, kidnapped agricultural engineers brought over to establish one of the most complex irrigation systems in America. By deliberately targeting a narrow region in West Africa, the planters inadvertently did something they never anticipated. They gathered people who shared common origins, common linguistic foundations, and common spiritual systems into one place. Because the white owners were absent, the day-to-day operations were left to the enslaved Africans themselves. This led to a unique labor structure called the task system. Unlike the brutal gang system used on cotton plantations, where enslaved people were forced to work from sunrise to sunset under the whip, the rice plantations operated differently. An enslaved person was given a specific, grueling task for the day, such as clearing a quarter-acre of swamp or digging a set length of canal. It was backbreaking, deadly work in waist-deep, snake-infested water. However, if they managed to finish their task before sunset, the rest of the day belonged to them. This tiny window of time bought with blood and sweat was everything. In those remaining hours, they grew their own food, hunted, fished, and most importantly, they gathered. In these gatherings, away from the eyes of their captors, they built a society. Have you ever heard the famous campfire song Kumbaya? For decades, people thought it was just a traditional American folk song. It is not. Kumbaya is actually a Gullah phrase. It means come by here. It was a spiritual plea to God, sung in the Gullah Creole language, echoing across the dark swamps of South Carolina. And they didn't just sing. They performed the ring shout, a deeply spiritual, counterclockwise circle dance that was a direct continuation of West African rituals. They cooked hoppin' john and red rice, dishes that are practically identical to the traditional jollof rice of West Africa. They weren't just remembering a homeland. They were actively recreating it. But for a long time, all of this was still just a hypothesis based on fragmented records, linguistic clues, and cultural similarities, until DNA spoke up. In the late 2000s and throughout the 2010s, the African Ancestry Project and geneticists began sampling the DNA of the Gullah Geechee people. What they found didn't just confirm history, it rewrote it. For the vast majority of African Americans in other regions, DNA data showed widespread genetic admixture from across West and Central Africa, a testament to the brutal separation and mixing of slavery. However, for the Gullah Geechee, the DNA chart was an astonishingly cohesive block. Haplogroups from both the maternal mitochondria and paternal Y chromosomes pointed to dense concentrations in specific regions of Sierra Leone and the Senegambia. Put simply, DNA proved that many Gullah Geechee people today share common ancestors from the exact same narrow villages in West Africa. Imagine you are in West Africa in 1720. You are born into the Mendi tribe. You understand the flow of the tides. You know the names of the river gods. After a dark night, your entire community is forced onto a ship. And when you are dumped into the swamps of South Carolina, you realize that the landscape here looks exactly like your homeland. It was their knowledge of rice cultivation that caused their ancestors to be enslaved. But in a cruel twist of irony, that exact same knowledge became the shield that protected their culture. Because the rice farming system was so complex and dangerous, plantation owners were forced to grant the Gullah people that operational autonomy. They organized their own teams, passed down knowledge to newcomers, and in the process of guiding each other, they spoke their own language and practiced their spiritual rituals for protection. They did not exist as broken fragments. They existed as a reconstructed ecosystem. There is a classic moment recounted by researchers. When they brought the DNA test results to St. Helena Island in South Carolina and showed them to an elderly woman in the Gullah Geechee community, the chart pointed directly to the coast of Sierra Leone. She was not surprised in the slightest. She simply looked calmly at the paper and said, "That's where the rice knowledge comes from. We always knew that." Modern science took 300 years to catch up to what the memory of a community had preserved with blood, grains of rice, and oral stories. After the American Civil War and the abolition of slavery, the white plantation owners abandoned the coastal swamps. The Gullah Geechee people stayed. They bought the land they had worked for generations. For another century, they lived in relative peace, maintaining their unique way of life. But today, they face a new kind of erasure. The beautiful coastal sea islands are now prime real estate. Wealthy developers are building massive luxury resorts, golf courses, and vacation homes, driving up taxes and slowly pushing the Gullah Geechee off their ancestral lands. Places like Hilton Head Island, once a stronghold of Gullah culture, have been largely swallowed by commercial development. This is why the DNA evidence is so crucial today. It is not just a history lesson. It is a weapon against modern erasure. It proves their deep, unbroken connection to this land and validates their fight to protect their heritage corridor from being paved over by concrete and greed. The transatlantic slave system was designed to strip away humanity, to turn people into machines without a past. Plantation ledgers deliberately erased their names and origins. But the oppressors forgot one thing: DNA is an archive that cannot be burned. The survival of the Gullah Geechee people is not merely a geographic accident. They are living archives, surviving the ocean, surviving the brutality, to carry the seeds of a brilliant civilization and plant them on a new continent. Their story forces us to ask, how much more knowledge, how many more civilizations are hidden within the food, the music, and the DNA of other communities of color that we have yet to decode? Science is handing us a new lens, and the pages of history written by the victors are now having to be rewritten once again. If you found this story about how DNA outlasted the brutality of history fascinating, don't forget to hit like, subscribe to the channel, and share this video. What are your thoughts on the power of genetics in rediscovering our roots? Let me know down in the comments. See you in the next journey to decode history.